The Arab world's longest-serving leader has died. Sultan Qaboos of Oman is credited with modernizing his country and, in a volatile region, prioritizing diplomacy over division. So will that policy continue under the new monarch? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Oman is mourning the death of a man who transformed the nation. Sultan Qaboos bin Said was 79 and had been ill for some time. Over the course of 50 years, he turned a poor country on the Arabian Peninsula into a modern state, which stayed diplomatically neutral in a region divided by conflict. Oman and several of its neighbours have now declared 3 days of mourning. Sultan Qaboos' successor was sworn in just a few hours after his death was announced. Haytham bin Tariq immediately promised to build on his late cousin's legacy.
We remain guided by the late Sultan's wisdom going forward. We will preserve and embark on the achievements he made. This is what we are adamant to do, to follow in his footsteps. With respect to international relations, we will follow in the same course set out by the late Sultan. We will embrace foreign policies based on peaceful coexistence without any interference in domestic affairs of other states.
All right, let's take a closer look then at who Haytham bin Tariq Al Said actually is. A prominent member of the ruling Al Said family in Oman, he graduated from the UK's two most prestigious universities, Oxford and Cambridge. Prior to his inauguration, he was a Minister of Heritage and Culture. He held that post for 18 years. The 65-year-old was also head of the Vision 2040 committee, helping to develop Oman's economic and social strategy. We'll speak to our guests in a moment, but first, Rob Matheson looks back at Sultan Qaboos' life.
Qaboos bin Said Al Said was an only son, born in 1940 to a life of royal privilege and to a father he would overthrow 30 years later. Sultan Qaboos was educated in Oman and then at a private school in the UK before graduating from Sandhurst Military Academy and serving in the British Army for several months. On his return to Oman in 1966, his determination to modernise his country is said to have been ignored by his father. 4 years later, backed by the British, Sultan Qaboos seized the throne. He was immediately plunged into his first crisis, an uprising by communists in Dhofar in the south of Oman who wanted independence. It took a further 6 years before the fighting ended, with Oman being supported by forces from Britain, Jordan and Iran. Oman's links with Iran, as well as its foreign policy of maintaining good relations with other neighbouring countries, have made it one of the main negotiators in the Gulf. That flexible foreign policy has been controversial. In October 2018, Sultan Qaboos met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Omani capital, Muscat. The meeting dismayed critics, who said Arab states should not be hosting Israeli leaders until peace was established between Israel and the Palestinians. Oman's foreign minister said his country was simply facilitating efforts towards negotiations. Sultan Qaboos had rarely been seen in public since he went through lengthy medical treatment in Germany in 2015. He was unmarried and had neither children nor siblings, and he did not publicly name a successor.
Time to introduce our guests now. From Muscat in Oman, we have Hushang Hassan Yari, Professor of International Relations and Security Issues at Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. Here in Doha, we have Luciano Zakara, an Assistant Professor of Gulf Politics at Qatar's University Gulf Studies Centre. In Brussels, in Belgium, Guy Burton, an Adjunct Professor of International Affairs at Vesalius College. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Let's go to Muscat first. And Sultan Qaboos seems to have been universally loved at home and respected abroad.
Absolutely. He was adored by his people, despite the hardship that the country went through because of the volatile situation in the region and the price of oil. But nevertheless, because of his charismatic personality and the father of the nation, he was extremely respected by the people and for cause. Because if you look at the time that he took over as Sultan, there was nothing in the country. There was one or two theological schools, nothing more than that. And now you can find many universities, thousands of students, and also in terms of infrastructure of the country, he built a modern country. This is why the people love him and respect him. He created the new Oman.
Right. And Luciano, abroad, further afield, certainly in the Gulf region, I mean, there was a huge amount of respect for the man who many didn't seem to really know. He was pretty enigmatic because he didn't really attend meetings, but nonetheless, his presence was always felt.
Exactly. He was not very well known because of his sympathy, but however, he was respected as a ruler and he was respected as a mediator. He managed to sit together people from every corner of the world. I mean, he was able to sit together United States and Iran. He was fundamental in managing some issues regarding the GCC current crisis. He was also important in mediating in Yemen issues. And he, as you mentioned in the report, he received the visit of Netanyahu, who was very controversial on one point, but on the other hand, it showed how interested he was in fixing problems in the Middle East using his own charismatic way of doing foreign policy.
Right. And Guy, in Brussels, many describe his greatest achievement as being basically keeping his country out of the many conflicts that are raging in the region.
Yeah, thank you, Fahmi. And yes, that's certainly the case. I mean, he very much kept his country independent. And what's interesting is that in your report, you pointed out that his successor and cousin has made it very clear that the intention is to continue with the non-interference policy, which seemed to serve the Omanis very, very well, especially in the current context in which you have divisions within the Gulf. And Oman and Kuwait very much taking the position that they want to be sort of independent, to be sort of the people that both sides can come to. And as your previous contributors have also pointed out, this is also reflected in the fact that the nuclear deal, which the Americans have since walked away from in the case of Iran, the start of that was very much helped by Oman hosting the talks between the Iranians and the Americans. Right. And coming back now to Hushang in Muscat, the Sultan Qaboos, I mean, he had a huge amount of power, didn't he? He was not only the Sultan, the head of state, he was the finance minister, he was the prime minister, he was the foreign minister, and he was in charge of the armed forces. He also spent an awful lot of time outside of the country because of his poor health. How did the country run with these great periods of absence?
It's fascinating what you say. Despite all of those responsibilities and quite long period of time absent from the country, everything continued to be run smoothly. It means that he was able to, with his colleagues, obviously, he was able to put in place the institutions solidly enough to continue working despite his absence. And also because of his presence, even in absence, his presence in the country, there was no real issue during his absence. So this is why, if you go back to those years, although the people were a bit anxious to know what's going on in terms of his health, but nevertheless the respect was there, and the country continued to work very, very normally. So contrary to the situation in some other countries in the region where a number of leaders, they are hated by their people and the people are looking for opportunity to overthrow him, he was absent and nothing happened, precisely because of the respect because of the love of his people. He was somebody who had a very clear vision for his country and for the region, and consequently he was able to put very capable people around him as members of the cabinet and also those elected in Majlis al-Shura, Majlis al-Dawla and so forth. And consequently, his absence didn't have any real impact on the daily functioning of the country.
Right. Luciano, many people who've been around the region, who've visited Oman, will be immediately struck, won't they, at the difference of the tone and the feel of the country. It also relies upon oil and gas exports for its financing, but it doesn't have the sleek skyscrapers that we can see behind you, Luciano, that are in other parts of the Gulf. It's got a completely different feel. Can you explain us culturally why that is, why it doesn't feel like the rest of the Gulf?
Well, it's interesting because if you discuss with expats in the GCC context, of course, they said that Oman is maybe the most genuine GCC state, that it preserves a lot of tradition. And even though it became a modern country, it did not change the identity of the country. This is basically assumed that because of the nature of the society, the Omani society, and also because the lack of resources that compared with the other GCC states made Oman to move towards modernity, following more smoother path toward this way of building or constructing cities in a way that we can see in Qatar, Emirates, or even Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. And also because, I mean, as I said, the traditional way of life in Oman was preserved by the people. The way of living of the Omani people is much more calmer than the other GCC states, and this can also explain the way in which Oman is behaving at the international level. It's people that they enjoy much more the traditions. They are not involved, for instance, in the sectarian tension that exists between Sunnis and Shia in the whole region. They have their own way of interpreting Islam, which is Ibadism, that makes them to be more absent of all the tension that has been raised in the region lately.
And Guy, I think we're getting a picture of Oman as being a place that is heaven on earth, but it's not completely that, is it? Because it's had its own brush with conflict within the country. I mean, 2011, when the region was grappling with what was known as the Arab Spring, it had its own incident, didn't it?
Yes, I mean, they were not as intense or as sustained as they were in other parts of the region, but it shows that what was happening in Oman in 2011 was similar to what was happening in the rest of the Arab world and the Gulf as well. I mean, as your previous contributors pointed out, you know, Oman doesn't have the same level of hydrocarbon resources as the other parts of the Gulf, and so for that reason, it had to start looking at diversifying its economy a lot earlier than those other countries. It started doing that in the mid-1990s. However, the pace of that wasn't fast enough. And obviously, it's not created sufficient numbers of jobs in other sectors, and especially for the young, which is why you had those protests taking place in 2011, and actually a couple that took place at the start of 2018 as well. So it's not completely smooth running for the authorities in Oman, and certainly, you know, the new Sultan is also going to face that challenge of how do we diversify, how do we ensure that Oman is able to have sustained growth and to be able to make improvements for its people.
Right, and Hushang, we've already heard the first words from the new Sultan, Sultan Haytham, and he's promised continuity as the main deliverable, if you like. Does he have the vision of 2040, as he was part of that committee, and what does that vision look like?
As I said earlier, I believe that the new Sultan is going to continue the same way as Sultan Qaboos used to work for the country. This is why his nomination or his appointment is received very gladly, happily by the people. In terms of his experience, again, he is a very experienced man, very well educated, and consequently, he was around this, Sultan Qaboos for the past many, many years. So in other words, when you have somebody who is a source of aspiration and able to transmit to his colleagues the vision he has, so it would be very easy for the others to continue the same way.
Yes,
Vision 2024.
Hushang, do we know that whether the new Sultan is going to amass the same level of power and control as Sultan Qaboos?
It's very difficult to say that at this very early stage. But what is important is really, even after under Sultan Qaboos, we can see a very incremental move in the direction of more openness, more democratization. So this is why, for example, we had very free and fair election at the municipality level, recently at the Majlis al-Shura consultative parliament, and so forth. So it means that the path is almost there, ready to continue, and consequently, I believe that Sultan Haytham is simply continue to do what was started, because contrary to some other countries where you see a rupture between the old and the new, here there is a question of continuity rather than stopping, shifting, changing drastically the situation. And being in charge of Vision 2040, which is basically to diversify the economy, gives him a lot of insight to the function of the machinery of the system, and consequently he is the one, I believe, who can and who is able to continue and to improve the situation and whatever was started earlier.
Right. Luciano, the news, the sad news of the passing of Sultan Qaboos came in the early hours, local time in this region. It was just a matter of hours, wasn't it, before his replacement was announced. You see that there's anything to comment on with regard to the swiftness with which his successor was named and sworn in?
Well, to be honest, there were some rumors circulating on internet that he might have been died a couple of days ago. I mean, it will be difficult to say that that this happened, and they were covering this until now to make sure that the appointment was done without any rejection or any controversy. But as you say, it was announced, and very sharply it was announced the successor. I assume that in the current situation in which we are in the whole region, the lack of, or certainty about who is going to rule or who was going to rule Oman was something that nobody wanted, and they made sure that everybody accepted and everybody realized that there was a current ruler ruling the country immediately after the demise of Sultan Qaboos. There had been always, in the academic environment, a discussion about how the succession will affect the continuity of the current modern state, the unity of the country, etc., etc. And now we are in a very bad situation with the confrontation between Iran and the United States. And I assume that having the certainty that Haytham has been appointed very quickly and without any controversy or any rejection from anybody within the political establishment is a good news, with guarantee a smooth transition with acceptation of all the monies.
Right. And so, Guy, given that, what Luciano has just said, the speed and the efficiency, if you like, of the transition, can we therefore expect that this era of discreet diplomacy will continue?
Well, I mean, that's the plan. And I mean, certainly, it's been very made clear to try and get a succession that was undisputed, unquestioned, which is actually in contrast to what a lot of people assumed before Sultan Qaboos's passing. There was an assumption that it was actually going to be a lot more fraught than it is. Now, the big question, of course, is the new Sultan going to be able to consolidate his position? But even if he does that domestically, I mean, the big challenge that Oman faces is that it is in a region which is quite volatile. So it is going to be buffeted around. And it is not a country that is particularly strong strong, that has a particular degree of independence in terms of its resources and patronage in the region. So, its foreign policy and its approach to taking this independent route is a way of trying to, stand apart a little bit and to ensure that it isn't affected by wider regional turbulence.
Right. And coming back to Muscat and to Hushang, it seems very much as though Sultan Qaboos's first priority on taking over in 1970 was this undertaking to modernise the country. What needs to be the first priority then for the new Sultan, Sultan Haytham?
I believe that the main challenge for the new Sultan is the economic situation. The price of oil is not what it used to be. Oman is a country like the majority countries in the region dependent on the oil revenue. And consequently, this is a challenge. But as my colleagues mentioned earlier, as Oman started to diversify its economy some time ago, and I believe it continues to do so. Already we can see, for example, in the sector of tourism, a big move, a big change.
So Luciano, do you think, therefore, that given this promise and this emphasis, if you like, on continuity, do you expect, therefore, that Muscat and Oman is likely to be the location of choice for any kind of back-channel negotiations that are going to take place, one would hope, especially when it comes to Iran and the US?
Well, as I said before, I mean, I was remarking in the whole show is that Qaboos was impressed in his own personal way of doing politics and foreign policy, and it's the way in which Oman was mediating between the different conflicts and the way Sultan Qaboos kept Oman aside of any of the big tensions that they exist in the region makes difficult to believe that Haytham will be able to do exactly the same. Of course, I believe that Haytham will try his best to keep Oman having this mediator role. But of course, we need to see how he's behaving personally, because it was much more related in a way in which Sultan Qaboos was impressed in his diplomatic style. The same as we have to say about the internal politics. I mean, there are many challenges for Haytham to keep the same kind of internal legitimacy, keeping the country united, and mainly since Guy mentioned that I mean there were some moves towards democratization in the since 2011, because there were demands for that, but the steps were very minor. So the next the current Sultan needs to improve a little bit that more, because it might be that, having in mind that the current Sultan is still in the way of getting his legitimacy from the population, he will need to address some of these demands for more opening or more democratization in the electoral processes, for instance, in the Shura Council.
Right, and Guy, giving the final word to you, if you could be brief, please. We've had an indication, really, of the economic problems that are there and are certainly on the horizon. Presumably, job creation is going to be one of the most pressing problems for the new Sultan, and that's got to form part of his diversification programme.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big things which we haven't talked about yet is the construction of the Duqm port and the special economic zone, which about 3-4 years ago got funding from China and the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank of around 265 million. The intention is that in a couple of years' time, that's going to open up an industrial park and enable a number of different sort of businesses and opportunities there. So it's going to be one to watch, especially when we think about the role of China in the Middle East and whether that's going to be influenced by its entry into Oman.
Great stuff. Thank you all very much indeed. Hushang Hassan Yari in Muscat, Luciano Zakara here in Doha, and Guy Burton in Brussels. Thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. You should know it by now. And if you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. There's a Twitter sphere as well. Our handle @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. So from me and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.